Thanks for joining us on the final day of ISE. We hope you've had a great show. How many of you were here with us on Tuesday when we did a little presentation of State of Market? Oh, a couple people in the back. All right, well, thank you very much. If you were here or listening or followed the streamcast on this, on Tuesday we talked a little bit more about the industry behind the show. We set up the conversation of, we all come to these shows, ISE, Infocom, etc., to partake of and learn about new technologies, but there is a massive industry behind this show, Pro AV. So we told the story of how big, how's it growing, what are the technologies that lead it, and today we wanted to shift our conversation a little bit more to the future, as we titled this presentation, Shifting Time, Place, and Tech. We all know we're moving to Barcelona, and we all know that along with that shift in place, we will move forward a year, and so new technologies, new trends will have emerged. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. My name is Sean Wargo. I'm Senior Director of Market Intelligence. I'm joined by Peter Hansen. He's our Economics Analyst at AVIXA. We're both within the Market Intelligence Department, where we have lots and lots of data to be able to bring to bear about topics in our industry. For those of you that don't know us, the Audiovisual and Integrated Experience Association, we are part owners of ISE. We put on the shows throughout the world related to this industry of professional AV. So we also have standards, we have certification, we have market research, etc. Over the last several years, we've really tried to refresh or update our take on the industry through our market research efforts. It's now become one of our pillar strategic initiatives for the association, one of many ways for us to be able to talk about and size the growth and opportunity in this market. We have a number of different research products that are available to our membership and also available for purchase. We're going to highlight a couple of these today. Peter represents on this far left-hand side this question of macroeconomics. So what is the outlook for demand on AV products and services? That's things like GDP, employment, etc. You'll see some of that data. We answer the question in the middle, IOTA, Industry Outlook Trends Analysis. This is where we look at size and growth. What are the biggest opportunities in our industry? How's that shaping up for the future? This is, for those of you in market intelligence, this is that total addressable market, TAM analysis type of data. We won't talk as much today about market opportunity analysis reports. These are where we drill into vertical markets. On Tuesday, we highlighted vertical markets a little bit more as the application area in our industry, as well as solutions. This research goes very, very deep, looks at value chain, talks about the true consumer end user in the vertical markets, audiences, office workers, travelers, guests, etc., and what their experiences are like and how technology impacts that. The purpose there is for those integrators in the market who are trying to explore new opportunity in one of those verticals, how do I get in? What are the pain points? What are the technologies that are desired? And how does technology solve it? We do have some data that we'll share a little bit around channel employment and also our monthly index, which kind of gives you a sense for the health of the industry from a sales perspective. So this industry and this show, obviously growing through time, a great story here that is tremendously large when you think about, especially from an individual perspective, whether it's manufacturer or integrator. As I said on Tuesday, we've drawn a very large circle around this, so we purposely used bubbles here to kind of convey this idea of what's in this space and what does it entail. In 2019 alone, our industry was about $247 billion globally. That is takeaway. So this is the amount that our end users, our customers, are spending on Pro AV products and services, whether it's hardware or cloud or value-added services on top. So that's the total spend, inclusive even of some markup on the products themselves. That's growing to $325 billion by 2024. And if you do the math on that or look at the slide, you'll see that that's a 5.7% compound annual growth rate. As Peter will talk about in a moment, this is a great story relative to GDP. So we think that we're doing about 2 times GDP in pretty much any economy that you look at, actually even exceeding 2x over GDP. So if you're looking as an investor in a place to, whether individually put my time and resources or as a company to put my dollars, that's a great return on investment for our industry. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter now, who's going to kind of set that backdrop as we drill into a more geographic story for our industry.
Thank you, Sean. We always like to start early in the presentations with a discussion of GDP. Our industry spreads across so many different vertical markets, government expenditures, as well as private industry, operation expenditures, as well as capital expenditures, that in the end it sort of necessarily reflects the broad economic context as best measured by GDP. Now, growth in 2019 was about 2.6%. We're looking expecting a slight acceleration in 2020, about 2.8%. Now, those growth numbers are good. We always support slow and steady, but want to emphasize again what Sean was discussing, that because of the growing technological capabilities, because of the growing ideas, knowledge of AV, we anticipate Pro AV growth to substantially exceed, double, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on the specific region, the GDP numbers. But I'm going to walk you through these large regions and describe the GDP variation, and you'll see that reflected in the Pro AV variation. The Americas right now are about 2.1% in 2019. Again, same percent projected for 2020. United States growth is actually ticking down slightly, but the rest of the region ticking up slightly to kind of counterbalance that. EMEA, with a broad region of where we are right now, has been the slower growing region over the past several years, but is actually driving the 2019 to 2020 acceleration, increasing from about 1.3% in 2019 to about 1.9% this year. APAC has been the leader in GDP growth, as well as Pro AV growth for the last several years, about 4.4% in 2019, 4.4% in 2020. I will mention that, of course, the coronavirus could impact that. Short-term shocks, historically, they may slow down the economy for 1 month, but then pent-up demand will release when the shock is done in the next month. So a slow month, the fast month, and overall, it looks like a normal year, true to projection. Of course, we can't say that the coronavirus shock will be a short 1 month issue. Seems maybe a little longer, not necessarily something that can be recovered from with just that pent-up demand release. So that could shy down a little bit. Something we'll be monitoring going forward. I want to sort of narrow the lens to the regions, to this region with our geographic focus. Right now we're in the Western Europe as we define it, which is the largest region by GDP, a little bit slower growing than the overall EMEA region at 1.4%. DACH has been the slower growing region. It really struggled a bit in 2019, very neutral growth figures, although 2020 it has a bit more optimism. It's kind of getting back to the Western Europe level of GDP growth. Scandinavia is exceeding those two regions, 1.4% last year, 1.8% this year, so very near to the overall regional averages. The leader among the sub-regions we're highlighting here is Central Europe, a little over to the east, some smaller countries, a little bit more dynamic, 3% growth this year. To talk you through the issues, some of the stories to pay attention to throughout the year to kind of adjust your own expectations for growth. Before I get into them, I just want to stress that I'm choosing to highlight them for particular regions, but they tend to all be applicable to pretty much all of the regions on some level. For Western Europe, I've chosen to highlight the trade negotiations between EU and Great Britain. We saw Brexit finalize at the end of January, which is good for economic certainty. That was a consistent stressor. Although the finalization means that Great Britain is out of the EU, no more representation on EU Parliament, it does not mean that the trade uncertainty is completely finalized. They have given themselves to the end of 2020 to reach a trade deal under which to operate. Right now we're still under the previous trade deal regime. If that trade deal cannot be finalized that could trigger something a little bit similar to the no-deal Brexit that you've heard about. The good news is that a lot of these sort of stickiest border issues have been resolved in the Brexit negotiations, so we're cautiously optimistic that although that may be a painful negotiation, not quite so painful as the whole Brexit saga of the past several years. Now, DACH has been affected by that Brexit saga quite strongly as well as broader trade issues. Germany in particular is very manufacturing heavy and export heavy as a result. With trade issues, manufacturing in the United States and Germany has been in what we call a technical recession, where its sort of GDP metrics are shrinking for back-to-back quarters. That was the main reason why DACH had such a tough GDP growth last year. Because of trade optimism with Brexit, with the US-China trade deal, that's one of the main reasons we're seeing DACH accelerate. So similar to Western Europe, monitor those trade negotiations, US-China as well. In Scandinavia, I've chosen to highlight the low birth rates, growing population, definitely a pan-European issue. With workforce declining, there's a lower percent of people are in the common working age, higher percent need to sort of take care of the elder population. We're going to be talking more about workforce challenges later on, but limited workforce is a major challenge for the AV industry. In Central Europe, I've chosen to highlight the political issues. We're seeing a lot of sharp divides, which creates uncertainty as elections happen. Businesses don't know if we're going to be under one sort of policy approach, one other very distinct policy approach. There's instability sometimes as well. Obviously not a Central European only issue, broader European issue, broader global issue. We certainly understand about sharp political divides in the United States. So something to monitor, just a little bit of downward risk in GDP going forward. Now, before I transition back to Sean, I just want to reiterate that I've highlighted some negative trends, downward risks on this slide, but the positives outweigh the negatives. There are lots of reasons for optimism, and those reasons are added together to see meaningful growth in Pro AV in the coming years.
Thanks, Peter. So what we're going to do now is kind of translate that back into the industry and sort of what that looks like for growth at the overall regional level and then into some sub-region levels. We've actually highlighted in some cases, as we'll see in just a moment, the technology areas that we feel are really emerging or growing at a faster rate, where there's true opportunity for Pro AV in those segments. So the big story as we look at Pro AV from a global perspective and sort of how these trends are impacting the growth rates across the globe, the big story for us has been this shift from North America as what was the largest region for Pro AV over to APAC. You can see that with this 2019 slide that shows now about just over $90 billion, almost $91 billion worth of Pro AV products and spending in Asia Pacific, $89 billion in the Americas. Really, this is that story, as Peter kind of highlighted from an overall perspective, just compound annual growth rates on GDP throughout the years. We know that APAC, especially in modern, more recent days, has been seeing a downward trend in their overall GDP growth. We were in double-digit territory not that long ago. That's come down into the mid-single digits. But overall, that story just ultimately results in growth for industries like ours, Pro AV, which are facilitating, enabling, and a part of that expansion. So a 7% compound annual growth rate for overall Asia Pacific expected even as we go out to 2024. That compares to about 4.7% for the Americas. Europe is around 4.5%. MEA, the smaller economy, almost $11 billion in 2019. Off that small base, you often get these very large growth figures, so also 7.1% there. We want to focus in a little bit on Europe and kind of tell this story of how that composition breaks up. So as you can see from this, the largest composition here really is that Western Europe story. So almost more than a third of revenue in EMEA goes towards Western Europe, $32.5 billion market for Pro AV by 2024. The rest, regions in Africa, as we mentioned before, this is a smaller economy story where you see a much higher growth rate because of that. If there's one part of forecasts that are very, very difficult, is in these areas where there's not a lot of available public information. You know, some economies are that way, so it's hard to really verify. I would say if we have one area where we may be actually outperforming even forecast, it is in some of these regions. South Africa, as an example, would be a stronger economy. Some of the northern African economies as well. We've kind of reflected that here at 7.2% expected compound annual growth rate in North Africa, but even sub-Saharan at 6.3. And as you can see, that is a very small chunk of the overall revenue for this industry. We did expect that Scandinavia would be a little bit slower than the rest of EMEA. Some of that was in recent past, some shrinking economies in some of the underlying countries. But as Peter noted, the GDP is starting to expand again. Compound annual growth rates at about 3.4%, 2019 to 2024. A lot on this slide. I noticed some of you taking pictures, but we'll start to pull this apart a little bit as we go through the deck here. So let's talk a little bit about Western Europe. We noted already with some of the macroeconomic trends that there had been some challenges in Western Europe, Brexit related, but we do start to see that improving. We get now through 2024 a 4% expansion rate in AV revenues through 2024. What's really driving a lot of this, and this is a global story too, is underlying technology changes and a shift towards what may sound to some like more IT-related technology. That makes sense. Here at ISE or at Infocom, we're hearing a lot more about back-end systems and the need to learn IP protocol and standards in order to be an AV professional these days. So this distinction between AV and IT really blurring. And that comes through in the products that are really dominating this region. So you note 22% right now of revenues for Western Europe coming from this category of streaming media storage and distribution, AV servers, media servers, those kinds of technologies. That grows to 26% by the time we're out to 2024. We need these back-end systems in Western Europe and really, honestly, throughout the world. Conferencing and collaboration is the largest solution area. This makes sense. Lots of corporations are needing to accommodate remote workforce. About $48.8 billion in this region in 2019 related to conferencing and collaboration, 16% of Pro AV revenues for this market. One of the other phenomenons that we're hearing is in Western Europe and in many other places is a shift in investment from, say, temporary structure, live events where you're renting equipment, to fixed installation of technology. So companies, venues, stadiums, etc., wanting to own the equipment rather than lease it out. Some of this is brand preference, company or artists or other types of customers preferring a certain brand of speaker or audio processing technology. So we've seen that growing at a tremendous rate, 8.2% for Western Europe, and you'll see that in a lot of cases as well. Underneath that is also a shift towards LED video displays as we try to engage customers in new and exciting ways, and costs and availability of that product massively improving. Switching over to Central Europe, slow and steady, or in steady growth here at 6% expansion in Pro AV, a strong story, especially relative to the overall region. What we really noted here is a dominance in audio equipment. So there's a tremendous amount of investment actually happening in audio. Some of that was headset, about 0.6 billion, so a little smaller in terms of overall percentage, but growth in these areas, 11.6, overall audio 6.4%. We see a tremendous amount of investment in this region in audio technologies. This is a great story. Displays often get the limelight. They're often talked about as that sort of flagship technology, but to see audio at the top is always a nice story to be able to tell. In DACH, we're seeing a strong investment in the service component. Also a nice story of the value proposition that our industry brings. This particular market, 43% of revenues in DACH going towards cloud-based services, AV installation, consultation, design. So technologists, providers being able to add on top of technology, offer solutions bundling together with services that offers a better margin story in those areas. We're also seeing a very large increase in video display. As I note, this was one of our top themes overall for our industry. We talk about global trends. The evolution of display is something we've been talking about for quite some time, but what's really happened over the last couple years, as you're seeing in dock in particular, is this shift over to the new format technology. We saw supply improve, we saw pixel pitch improve, we saw resolutions come up as a result, and all of that is fueling this market and in some ways accelerating a shift away from some more older technologies, projection. Though, as you'll note, as you talk to manufacturers here, never rule out projection. There's always still an opportunity, an application area that makes sense when you want to paint with light rather than pave the world with displays. So certainly will continue to be available in the market. As we focus in on some of the smaller economies in the region, Middle East, North Africa, one thing we noted particularly in our forecast this year was a strong investment in cinema. Cinema is not necessarily a large chunk of the overall industry for us. It's it's a fairly small single-digit sorts of investment, but we saw some changes in the market. So Saudi Arabia in particular was noted in our reports this year, had lifted a ban on cinemas. That's contributing to a 20% compound annual growth rate in this category for Pro AV as new cinemas brought online and as technology improves. So a strong area of growth. That's about double what you'll see in many other regions of the world. Live events also. So as this economy improves and more consumers are have available spending, and as it becomes a destination even for customers, you start to see this investment in these types of pop-up events. This is counter to that trend we were just heard about before, where we're seeing more investment in fixed installation. But at 11% compound annual growth rate through 2024, 1.5 billion in 2019. This is a tremendous story of opportunity for the live events professional. In the sub-Saharan regions, smaller market, 1.7 billion in 2019. Strong growth, 6%. That surpasses global growth at that 5.7 we talked about before. A characteristic here, we're seeing a strong investment in security, surveillance, life safety type technologies. This is 25%, growing at 8.4, so a strong investment. We're seeing this actually also in regions of APAC, where countries are investing in these types of technologies. Sometimes it sounds a little bit scary, the privacy issues. I think we're seeing some of that play out on the current stage, but countries really wanting to move towards as a part of smart city sort of investment. This is another aspect of that. So last but not least, we move to Eastern Europe, Scandinavia. Modest pace here. Another audio equipment story, 6.6% for Eastern Europe. In Scandinavia, we're seeing a video display. So this is rising to the top of the technology list in Scandinavia. A strong market for control systems, 8.2%, about $500 million by 2024, 10% of revenues. So you can start to see some of the unique characteristics that these individual markets represent. All of this is modeled out as we get shipment data from manufacturers and then start to look at what's happening on a global basis. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit as we kind of round out our presentation today to kind of look at, well, as we move towards Barcelona in 2021, what kinds of shifts are we seeing in the relative ranking, in this case for EMEA, in terms of investment areas and where spending is actually happening? I noted already this story of streaming media storage and distribution, the kind of IT-sounding technologies. Tremendous compound annual growth rates, lots of revenue, really keeping that at the top of the list. So you would expect, as you come to shows like ISE or others throughout the world, you would expect to see those technologies at least around the periphery, if not front and center of the storyboard as you go into the show floor to explore. Services right behind it is a great story for our industry. And I think I've said before in other presentations that if there's an area where I expect us to exceed expectations, it really is in services. Things like managed services are tracked as part of what we present in our research, but it's also a very new opportunity for our integrator installers, where they're starting to get a handle on this recurring revenue idea. How do I serve a customer, not just in one transaction, one project, but through time? Maybe cloud, maybe digital signage with content as a service sorts of things, maybe as managed upgrade path, that kind of stuff. But Growth here, keeping it at number 2. Some other shifts, though, that are going on. I just talked about in Scandinavia some investments in control systems, for example. That kind of moving it up the list, it'll now be number 4. And here's where we're talking about AMX, Crestron, Extron, those types of solutions in the marketplace, kind of ticking up. The one decliner you'll see, so the yellow is 2019, the bullet or bullseye is 2024. You notice projection is expected to decline. That's one of our areas of decreased investment as we see shifts to large format LED display, even some larger format flat panel, etc. A couple other movements, environmental, so this is racks and other storage systems expected to kind of come up the list as we go forward. All of that is kind of changing the composition of our marketplace, both from a technology and therefore a skills perspective. So I wanted to hand it over to Peter again to talk a little bit about that recruitment and skill set development opportunity and challenge.
Yeah, with all this growth, AV companies need to find the talent to install it, to support it, to build it. At the end of last year, we went to our members and other partners and fielded a huge survey asking them about some of their pain points. AV integrators told us that their number one business challenge was recruiting and retaining qualified staff to do all the amazing work that they do. They have also told us, we polled our global AV Insights community about this issue, asking them, what are you doing to respond to it? And they told us, some of us are giving substantial raises, but we're trying to solve this creatively rather than with cash only. They've spent extra time searching. They've been willing to accept less qualified workers and then train them up. So it's a challenge for businesses with a lot of different ways to solve. And it's a global issue, but it's not a uniform issue. Europe here has describe it as a spectrum of worker availability. Northern Europe, like the US, like many other countries, experiencing low unemployment, 3%, 4%, 5% tops. In many of these countries, like the Netherlands, like Germany, like UK, like the Nordic countries, with that level of unemployment, the growth that Pro AV has seen, there's not a lot of workers. But that's different in southern European countries, like Spain, where we're going next year, about 14% unemployment. Although that's much better than a few years ago and was up to 26%. Italy is about 10%, Portugal even about 6-7%. So with the growth that Pro AV has seen in these countries, Sean's going to talk a little bit about Spain next slide, there's not going to be a bench of skilled AV workers that you can draw from, but there's a bench of motivated workers. So if you're able to train workers, work with them, bring them on, inspire them about what we can do, there may be some solutions, opportunities to build your business that are different from the north of Europe as we move to the south of Europe next year in Barcelona.
All right, and I thank you for sticking with us as we run over a little bit on our time. But we wanted to transition the story now, just as we're gearing up and closing down ISE in Amsterdam and moving to Barcelona. We wanted to give you just a little snapshot of the Pro AV market in Barcelona and Spain and what that looks like. So we're talking about a 1.7% compound growth rate on GDP in actually 2020 itself. GDP expected to expand by 1.7%. Revenues in that market are about $3.6 billion. The AV growth rate, 4%, 2019 to 2024. But in terms of composition and what that market actually looks like from a solution perspective is very interesting and very unique. Globally, we've been talking about conferencing collaboration as a big investment area. That makes sense. We talked about the need to reach remote worker, coordinate across facilities, etc. But in actually Spain's market, we're actually seeing digital signage as the top solution area, about 16.5% of Pro AV investment in that area. Putting it at number one, eclipsing by far actually conferencing collaboration in that market. Learning right behind it, 15.7. This also very different than the globe, where we see this actually more at about third or fourth place in the market. Content distribution, live events, kind of rounding this out. So the characteristic of this market kind of sets the stage for what the show might look like as we go forward. We hope that you'll certainly join us there. We wanted to leave you with just a few key thoughts as we do that. As we kind of highlighted today, certainly the overall Pro AV market, strong, growing, etc. That's on the backs of very good, healthy GDP. The reason for that? Diversity. We see geographic, technology, solution, application through vertical market, all these sorts of things offering us a tremendously diverse opportunity as we go forward. Why? I think you see in the Spanish market too, with this health of live events and even other types of things, digital signage, we're about an experience economy. That's fueling our industry, giving ourselves, our providers, a chance to differentiate themselves through services and other value-added offerings. Thank you so much for joining us this year. If you have any questions, certainly come to see us at our booth. Come to the website here at avixa.org. Email any one of us. There's a few of us on this slide, Peter, myself, and actually Holly Klarman, our business development specialist. And of course, start a conversation with us at #AVIXAIntel. Thank you and enjoy the rest of ISE.
Thank you, everybody.